We travel now to Missoula, nestled in the heartland of the United States in the state of Kansas. In the summer of 1989, this small community was a portrait of American life, a place where screen doors creaked on their hinges and the drone of cicadas was the soundtrack to long, humid evenings. It was here that Fawn Cox, a bright and responsible 16-year-old girl, lived with her mother and sisters. Fawn was the kind of teenager every parent hopes for. She was a pillar of support in her family, a responsible older sister who diligently helped her mother with the care of her younger siblings. Her life was a tapestry woven with threads of normalcy and youthful ambition. She was a regular attendee at her local church, a social butterfly who loved to swim, and during the sun-drenched summer months, she worked a part-time job at a company that sold tickets for amusement park trips, diligently saving up her pocket money for the simple joys of teenage life. On Wednesday, July 26, 1989, Fawn's day unfolded like any other. After finishing her shift, her mother picked her up by car, a routine born of parental caution. The evening hours were descending, and her mother was uneasy about Fawn using public transportation, a small measure of protection against the unseen dangers of the world. Back at home, Fawn mentioned she was tired. She had another shift the next morning. Seeking rest, she retreated to her bedroom on the second floor of their modest home. Her sisters typically occupied the room next to hers, a comforting proximity in the small house. But on this particular night, an unusual alignment of circumstances left Fawn alone on the upper floor. Amber, her sister, who was just a year younger, was out for the night, babysitting for a family friend. Her other sister, Felicia, found her own room unbearably hot and had decided to sleep downstairs, closer to the cooling relief of the air conditioner. The house settled into a quiet rhythm, each family member in their own world, unaware that a malevolent presence was about to shatter their lives forever. The following morning, around 9 a.m., the entire family was jolted awake by a piercing, insistent sound. An alarm clock, shrieking from Fawn's room, refused to be silenced. It blared on and on, a monotonous, desperate cry in the morning stillness. It was immediately clear that something was terribly wrong. Fawn would never let her alarm ring like that. A knot of dread tightening in their stomachs, Fawn's younger sister and mother rushed upstairs. They pushed open the door to her room and were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The sight that greeted them was a tableau of violence and violation that would be seared into their memories for eternity. Their first panicked instinct was to call for an ambulance, a desperate plea for a miracle that was already hours too late. When paramedics arrived, their grim task was to confirm the family's worst fears. A brief examination of Fawn's body revealed she had been dead for hours. The life of a vibrant 16-year-old girl had been brutally extinguished in the supposed safety of her own bed. The mystery deepened as the investigation began. The Cox home was small, with thin walls where sound traveled easily. Yet somehow, no one had heard a thing. How could a murder have been committed in such deafening silence? The answer, investigators believed, lay in the very machine the family had used for comfort against the summer heat. The air conditioning unit on the first floor was an old, rattling model. Its loud, incessant hum, a familiar part of the household soundscape, had likely masked any other noises that night, including the sounds of a struggle or a silent scream. It had created a cocoon of sound that had inadvertently provided perfect cover for the killer. The only sliver of unusual activity from that fateful night came from Fawn's sister, Felicia. She recalled that their family's poodle had been acting anxious throughout the night, barking persistently. At the time, they had dismissed it, attributing the dog's restlessness to something innocuous. They couldn't have imagined it was a warning, an animal's primal instinct sensing a danger the humans could not. When investigators examined the scene, they offered a more benign theory for the dog's behavior, suggesting it might have been due to her being pregnant. But the family would forever be haunted by the thought that their beloved pet had been trying to sound an alarm. The detectives meticulously combed through the house, piecing together a chilling theory of the killer's entry and actions. They believed the assailant had used the rear of the house, which overlooked the backyard, as his point of entry. A second-story window, nearly level with the railing of an attached building, offered a climbable path. It was a route that suggested a degree of familiarity or premeditated planning. Inside, the evidence was sparse but potent. On Fawn's bedsheets, investigators found the most critical piece of physical evidence: traces of semen. This was immediately collected and sent to a lab for analysis. A process that in 1989 was still in its infancy. As the forensic team worked, the family began to notice that several items were missing from the home. A radio, a Nintendo game console, and a stereo recorder were gone. The case, it seemed, had the hallmarks of a burglary gone horribly wrong. Yet, there were bizarre inconsistencies. Some of the stolen items were found just outside the house, seemingly tossed from the window by the thief, but then inexplicably abandoned. It was as if the perpetrator had taken them, but for some reason had been spooked or changed his mind, leaving them behind in his hasty retreat. This strange detail added another layer of complexity to the profile of the killer. The most disturbing discovery, however, was made in the room adjacent to Fawn's. Inside a closet, detectives found that items had been moved and stacked in a way that suggested someone had cleared out a space to hide. Their theory became even more terrifying. The killer had likely entered the house earlier, while the family was still awake, and concealed himself in the closet, waiting patiently for everyone to fall asleep. That room was normally occupied by Fawn's sister, Amber, who was providentially absent that night. Had she been home, she might have discovered the intruder, or worse, become another victim. The fact that no one noticed the disturbed items in the closet meant the killer's hiding spot had been perfect. Amidst the evidence, one object stood out as particularly out of place: an old military-style hat found in Fawn's room. The family confirmed it didn't belong to anyone in the household. It was a tangible link to the intruder, a mistake, a piece of himself he had left behind in the chaos. Investigators held onto it, hoping it would one day lead them to him. With the limited forensic tools of the era and no national genetic database, detectives knew they faced an uphill battle. The semen sample was their strongest lead, but without a suspect to compare it to, it was a lock without a key. Their next step was to canvass the area, to knock on doors, to talk to anyone and everyone who might have seen or heard something. They interviewed Fawn's friends, relatives, and neighbors. But each conversation led to a dead end. The neighborhood itself presented a challenge. It was a poor area with a high crime rate, a place where a criminal past was not uncommon and various gangs operated in the shadows. Trust in law enforcement was low, and fear of reprisal was high. For a month, the investigation stalled, lost, in a sea of silence and dead ends. The trail was growing cold. Just as hope began to fade, a breakthrough occurred. A month after the murder, police efforts finally yielded a witness. An individual came forward with a tip so significant it pointed detectives toward 3 specific suspects. The details of this tip were never made public, but they were compelling enough for police to act based on this information. 3 young men were arrested and brought in for questioning. All 3 vehemently denied any involvement in the murder. However, the police had more than just a tip. A search of the suspects' homes yielded some of the very items that had been stolen from the Cox residence. When confronted with this evidence, the young men could not provide a plausible explanation for how they had come to possess Fawn's belongings. It seemed the case was finally cracking open. The detectives felt a surge of confidence. They believed they were closing in on Fawn's killer. But their optimism would be short-lived. 2 devastating developments were about to unfold, plunging the investigation back into darkness and leaving the family with more questions than answers for decades to come. Just as investigators believed they were tightening the net around Fawn Cox's killers, their case began to unravel with breathtaking speed. The first blow came from their star witness, the individual who had provided the crucial tip that led to the three suspects suddenly and inexplicably recanted their statement. They ceased all cooperation with the police, pulling the foundational pillar out from under the prosecution's case. The reason for this sudden reversal was never publicly disclosed, but detectives suspected intimidation. In a neighborhood where silence was often a currency for survival, the fear of reprisal from gangs or the suspects themselves was a powerful motivator. Without this testimony, the link between the three young men and the crime became significantly more tenuous. The second, more definitive blow came from the crime lab. The semen sample found on Fawn's bedsheets, the most powerful piece of physical evidence, had been analyzed. The results were in, and they were a crushing disappointment for the investigation. The DNA profile extracted from the sample did not match any of the three suspects in custody. In the world of 1989 forensics, this was a nearly insurmountable obstacle. While the police still had the stolen property, it was only circumstantial evidence. It could place the men at the scene of a burglary, but it could not prove they were responsible for the murder. The DNA exclusion seemed to exonerate them from the ultimate crime, despite the lack of sufficient evidence for a murder charge. The detectives remained convinced that these men were involved, that they knew more than they were letting on. The pressure of interrogation continued. Under this pressure, one of the young men finally broke. He confessed to the burglary, admitting that he and his friends had broken into the Cox house that night. However, he adamantly denied any part in the murder. He provided a specific, verifiable detail to bolster his story. He told police that he had personally taken the stolen stereo recorder, tossed it out of the window, and hidden it behind a bush in the yard. Acting on this information, officers went to the exact spot he described, and there, nestled amongst the foliage, was the missing device. His statement was incredibly consistent with the evidence found at the scene. It was a monumental breakthrough, a confession that, at the very least, could secure a conviction for the burglary. But the victory was fleeting. In a stunning reversal, the young man swiftly retracted his confession. He declared he would no longer cooperate with the investigation in any capacity. This move was a strategic masterstroke, likely on the advice of legal counsel or due to external pressure. A retracted confession would be nearly impossible to use in court, leaving the police back at square one, with their witness gone, their DNA evidence non-matching, and their confession retracted. The police had no choice but to release the men. The investigation, which had seemed so promising just weeks before, had hit a brick wall. It was a source of immense frustration for the detectives and utter heartbreak for Fawn's family. The prevailing theory remained that these three young men had been involved, but perhaps they were not alone. Was there a fourth person with them that night? The one whose DNA was left at the scene? The one who was the true killer? Had the young men been scared into silence by this more violent accomplice? One of the suspects did eventually serve an 8-month prison sentence for the burglary. A small and unsatisfying measure of justice, but there was nothing to tie any of them to Fawn's murder. The case went cold. For over a decade, Fawn Cox's file gathered dust. Her family was left in a torturous limbo, haunted by the image of her final moments and the knowledge that her killer walked free. Their anger towards the police department grew, feeling that their daughter's case had been abandoned. They never wavered in their belief that the three original suspects were somehow responsible, that a wall of silence in their community was protecting a murderer. The dawn of the new millennium brought a glimmer of hope. In the year 2000, forensic science had made significant leaps. The first thing detectives did was take the preserved DNA sample from Fawn's case and upload it to the newly established CODIS Combined DNA Index System database. CODIS was a national repository containing DNA profiles from individuals convicted of serious crimes. If Fawn's killer had committed another offense and had his DNA collected, they would finally get a match. The sample was uploaded. The search was run. The result? Failure. No match was found for Fawn's killer. This result was perplexing. The primary suspects for the detectives in 2000 were still the same three young men from 1989. Given that they were in possession of Fawn's stolen property, it was almost certain they had been in her house. The theory of a fourth man, the one who had sexually assaulted and murdered Fawn, solidified. But this only raised more questions. How did four culprits manage to enter the house, commit a murder, and leave without anyone noticing? The noisy air conditioner could explain some of it, but it still seemed an audacious and risky crime. With no new leads and no hits in CODIS, the detectives were once again at a dead end. The case was officially relegated back to the cold case files. For Fawn's family, the years that followed were filled with a quiet, gnawing grief. Their faith that the murder would ever be solved dwindled with each passing year. The world moved on, but they remained trapped in that horrific July morning of 1989. It wasn't until 2018 that a new revolution in DNA technology began to solve cold cases across the country at an astonishing rate. Forensic genealogy, a technique that used public genealogy databases to identify suspects through their relatives, was cracking cases once thought unsolvable. Dozens, then hundreds of cold cases were being closed. Fawn's family saw this news and felt a renewed surge of hope. They contacted the police department and asked why they weren't moving faster to apply this new technology to Fawn's case. They kept pushing, kept calling, kept advocating for the daughter they had lost. But each time, they received the same disheartening answer. The new DNA testing required money, and the department had a backlog of hundreds of cases. They would have to wait their turn for the funding to become available. Refusing to be deterred, the family decided to take matters into their own hands. In 2019, they launched a fundraising campaign to cover the full cost of the DNA testing themselves. The story gained traction in the media, and they offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could lead to the arrest of the perpetrators. Their plea resonated with the public, and many people responded to their call for help. The family quickly raised the necessary funds. It seemed, finally, that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. But their hope was once again met with frustrating bureaucracy. Despite the funds being available and the official paperwork seemingly in order, the police department still delayed initiating the investigation, feeling that their case was not a priority for the police. Perhaps because they were a poor family from a poor neighborhood, they sought outside help. They contacted Parabon Nanolabs, the very company that had become famous for solving dozens of cold cases using forensic genealogy, a company we have mentioned many times in other videos. The family's persistence and the public pressure, finally, forced the department's hand. In November 2020, with the funds provided by the family's tireless efforts, the police department sent the samples from Fawn's room to a lab. The semen sample, preserved for over 30 years, was about to tell its story. The lab went to work. They extracted a full DNA profile and, using the advanced techniques of forensic genealogy, began building a family tree, searching for relatives of the unknown killer in public DNA databases. It was a painstaking process, a digital investigation that spanned generations. And then, they found him. A name. A match. The identity of the killer sent a shockwave through the family and the community. It was not one-off, three original suspects. It was not a stranger. The DNA on Fawn's bedsheets belonged to her own cousin, Donald Cox. Donald was 21 years old at the time of Fawn's murder and was known to be a troubled man. He had a criminal record for offenses like theft and illegal substance possession, In 1989, DNA samples were not routinely collected for such crimes. If they had been, the case would have been solved decades earlier. The tragic discovery, coming so many years later, finally answered the question that had tormented Fawn's family. Who could have known the family's routine so well? Who could have navigated their home with such confidence but a close relative? With the killer identified, the police did not press any new charges against the three original suspects. With the primary culprit found, trying to secure a confession from them for their part in the burglary no longer had any meaning or importance. The final bitter twist in this long and painful saga was that Donald Cox would never face justice for his heinous crime. He had lived his life for decades as if nothing had happened, carrying his dark secret. Years before, he was identified as Fawn's killer. He died of a drug overdose. The chance for a confession, for an explanation, for a courtroom reckoning was gone forever, lost to the same demons that likely drove him to commit such a monstrous act in the first place. We now travel to another corner of the United States, to the city of Stockton, California, the heart of San Joaquin County. The story begins on March 29, 1995. A local man named Floyd, who made a living as a canner, was going about his daily routine. He scoured the area for recyclable materials, metal cans, plastic bottles, cardboard, anything he could sell to make a few dollars. His search often took him to the rural waterways and canals that crisscross the region. As he navigated the area near Bacon Island, something unusual caught his eye. Partially submerged in the murky water of a canal was a refrigerator, its off-white door glinting in the California sun. It was bound shut with a distinctive golden-colored rope. Curiosity piqued. Floyd managed to pull the heavy appliance towards the bank. Perhaps there was something of value inside. He unfastened the rope and heaved open the door. The sight that met his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated horror. Stuffed inside the cramped confines of the refrigerator were human remains. Stunned and horrified, Floyd immediately sought help, calling the police to report his gruesome discovery. When deputies from the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office arrived, they secured the scene and began the grim task of examining the makeshift coffin. The body inside was in an advanced state of decomposition, the facial features so deteriorated that they were completely unrecognizable. The victim had been placed inside with a pillow and was wrapped in a sleeping bag and blankets. Her hands and feet were bound with electrical tape, and a sock had been stuffed into her mouth, a final, silencing act of brutality. Detectives immediately knew this was a homicide, but they also believed the canal was merely a dumping ground. The murder itself, they theorized, had happened elsewhere. As they carefully examined the victim's clothing, a puzzling picture began to emerge. The brands were expensive, high-end labels, suggesting she came from a wealthy background. She wore jewelry, including a costly necklace, and on her right ring finger was a 3-carat diamond ring. This was not a victim who seemed to fit the profile of someone who would end up discarded in a canal. The stark contrast between her apparent affluence and the brutal manner of her disposal was the first of many mysteries. The most difficult step of the investigation, however, would be to give her a name. The body was transported to the coroner's office, where an autopsy soon revealed a wealth of details about the unknown woman. She was estimated to be between 29 and 41 years old, stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, and weighed approximately 120 pounds. She had strawberry blonde or reddish hair and well-manicured nails, another sign of a life of means. Her teeth were in perfect condition. The examination also revealed injuries to her skull that were consistent with a violent death. The official ruling was homicide, but due to the advanced decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. Forensics estimated she had been killed at least 6 months prior to her discovery. Investigators also analyzed the refrigerator and the items within it. Based on the specific models of the fridge and the sleeping bag, they were able to theorize a probable location for the victim's origins. They believed she likely came from the East Bay region of Northern California, a more affluent area miles away from the rural canal where she was found. This geographical clue was something, but it was a vast area to search, despite having a detailed physical profile. The remains did not match the description of any known missing persons. The unidentified, unfortunate woman was given a moniker that would stick with her for decades: the lady in the refrigerator. Detectives did all they could with the technology of the time. They entered her information into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, a database designed to connect the nameless dead with the families who were searching for them. But there were no hits. Her remains were eventually buried in an unknown location under an unknown name. Despite the department's efforts and countless hours of investigative work, no concrete leads emerged. Her case went cold. Though the investigation had stalled, the detectives did have a theory, a dark and tantalizing possibility that lingered in the minds of many involved in the initial inquiry. They suspected that the lady in the refrigerator might have been a victim of one of America's most prolific and elusive serial killers, Terry Rasmussen. Rasmussen, also known as the Chameleon Killer, was responsible for a string of murders across the United States from at least 1978 to 2002. He was a master of disguise, using numerous aliases to evade capture for decades. The reason for the suspicion in this case was that Rasmussen was known to have many other victims whose identities and whereabouts were never proven. He operated in California during the time frame of the murder, and the brutal, depersonalized nature of the crime fit his pattern. However, the suspicion never progressed beyond a theory. Investigators lacked any direct evidence to link Rasmussen to the crime. They could never take action. The possibility of a confession, of a definitive answer, vanished forever in late 2010, when Terry Rasmussen died of natural causes in prison, taking his secrets to the grave. The trail had gone completely cold. The identity of the lady in the refrigerator seemed destined to remain a mystery forever. The case file was shelved, a silent testament to a life brutally taken and a name lost to time. It would remain that way until late 2022, nearly 3 decades. After her discovery, when a revolution in DNA technology would breathe new life into this cold case, offering a new direction and a final hope for an answer. This new hope came from the field of investigative genetic genealogy. This groundbreaking method combined advanced DNA analysis with traditional genealogical research and historical records. In 2022, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office decided to take another look at the lady in the refrigerator case. They partnered with Othram Inc., a private lab based in Texas that specialized in forensic genealogy and had an incredible track record of solving cold cases. The first step was a somber one. The victim's remains were exhumed from her anonymous grave. A portion was sent to Othram for analysis at the lab. Scientists used a proprietary process to build a comprehensive DNA profile from the badly degraded remains. Using advanced genome sequencing, they were able to obtain a wealth of genetic information that was unimaginable in 1995. This profile was the key. With it, a team of forensic genealogists began their painstaking work. They uploaded the profile to public genealogy databases and started searching for distant relatives, building out family trees and piecing together a genetic puzzle. It was a slow, meticulous process, following threads of DNA back through generations, using public records, obituaries, and social media to connect the dots. The search eventually led them to a woman who they believed could be the victim's daughter. But this led to another question. Was this woman even aware her mother was missing? The answer would be the key to unlocking the entire mystery, and would reveal a family tragedy far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The work of the forensic genealogists at Othram Inc. was akin to assembling a complex puzzle with thousands of pieces spanning generations and geography. After weeks of painstaking research, tracing distant cousin matches, and building out extensive family trees, they zeroed in on a candidate. They had identified a woman living in the present day who they believed, with a high degree of certainty, was the biological daughter of the lady in the refrigerator. This was the pivotal moment the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office had been waiting for, but it was one fraught with emotional complexity. They had to make a phone call that could potentially unravel a family's entire history. When investigators contacted the woman, her first discovery was a shock. The daughter had no idea her mother was considered a missing person. In her mind, and in the narrative she had lived with for most of her life, her mother had made a conscious choice to leave, to abandon her past and start a new life elsewhere. The idea that her mother had been the victim of a brutal murder nearly 30 years ago was something she had never considered. Despite the stunning and painful nature of the news, the daughter agreed to help. She voluntarily provided a DNA sample to be compared with the remains found in the canal. The sample was sent to the lab. The final comparison was made. And then, the report came back. It was a definitive match. After 28 years of being a nameless ghost, a tragic footnote in the annals of cold cases, the lady in the refrigerator finally had her name back. She was identified as Amanda Lynn Deshay. The confirmation of her identity opened a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives could now begin to piece together the life of the woman whose death had been a mystery for so long. Amanda Deshay was born in 1965. She was only 29 years old in 1994, the year she was believed to have been murdered. Not much was known about her early life, other than that she grew up with her mother and a sister. At the time of her death, Amanda was a mother of three, two daughters and a son. The circumstances of their births were unclear, but it was evident that Amanda's life had been far from the affluent picture painted by her expensive clothing. She had been going through a difficult, tumultuous period, despite her deep love. For her children, she was struggling, and her life was spiraling out of control. Eventually, she lost custody of her children, who were then placed into state care and put into foster homes. The daughter who provided the DNA sample, named Veronica, shared what little she could remember of her mother. Despite the painful story of abandonment she had grown up with, her memories of Amanda were of a sweet and loving person. This only added to the tragedy. Amanda was not a woman who would have willingly left her children forever. Had happened to her? The identification was a monumental step forward, but it also raised a host of new questions. Who would have wanted to kill Amanda Deshay? How did her life intersect with someone capable of such brutality? What were the final moments of her life like? The police were now able to reopen the investigation with a clear victim profile, a starting point they had lacked for decades. They could now trace her last known movements, speak to people who knew her, and try to uncover the secrets that had been buried with her. The investigation into Amanda's murder is ongoing. Her identity was confirmed just a month ago, and authorities are now actively working the case, hoping to finally uncover the clues that will lead them to her killer or killers. They have made a public appeal, urging anyone who might have known Amanda Deshay in the mid-1990s, anyone who might have information about her life, her associates, or her disappearance to come forward. Every small detail could be the key to solving the final piece of this puzzle. The story of Amanda Deshay is a powerful testament to the relentless march of science and the unwavering dedication of law enforcement. It's a story about how a team of scientists and detectives armed with new technology were able to reach back through time and give a name back to the nameless. For nearly 3 decades, she was just the lady in the refrigerator, a symbol of a mystery unsolved. Today, she is Amanda Lynn Deshay, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a woman whose story deserves to be told and for whom justice is long overdue. With the hope that her killer or killers will soon be identified, her family can finally begin to properly mourn the woman they lost so long ago. A woman reclaimed from the cold, murky waters of the past.